Welcome back, guys. I trust you've been staying safe. Now, before pastors like TB Joshua sprang up in Nigeria, there were others before them. One of such was a man who was shrouded in mystery, with so many people making so many superstitious stories about him, and him being allegedly accused of consuming the blood of several people and having some mystical powers that allowed him to do certain incredible things. Now, this person is none other than a man whom some referred to as a pastor, others referred to as an occultist, others referred to as a sorcerer. And the name of this man is Eddy Nawgu. Now, when you go on Wikipedia, Eddy Nawgu is actually classified as an alleged sorcerer and an occultist, and he has actually been described by the Nigerian media eventually as a false prophet. But like I always say, in order to understand the man, let's go back to the Genesis, so we begin to understand his exodus of how he came to become who he came to be and how we've come to know him as. So we go back to the early life of Eddy Nawgu. Now, he was born in a state in Nigeria called the Anambra State in eastern Nigeria. Now, this region is predominantly populated by the Igbo people of Nigeria. So, at the age of 29, Eddy Nawgu formed an organization which he called the Anioma Healing Center. Now, this organization had its headquarters at his own compound in his house in Nawgu, Anambra State. So, the Nawgu was not really his name. His name was Okeke, but then he came from a town called Nawgu, which is in the east of Anambra. And so, him being called Eddy Nawgu was more like Eddy from the town of Nawgu. If you are familiar with some of these African things, I think you would get it. They tie where you are coming from to your name so that people easily distinguish you from others with the same name you have. So that was how it started with him. Now, when he formed this organization, throughout the 90s or the 1990s, Eddy Nawgu would become a notable religious leader in Nigeria. Now, he had said that he had a spiritual encounter with God, and that was what set him on the path of establishing this so-called healing center. And so, obviously, many people were rushing to this man. They were rushing to him for miracles, rushing to him for prayer and breakthrough, just like you see with some of the so-called men of God these days, some of whom have later been questioned with regards to their credibility. Now, in the years 1999 through to 2000, Eddy Nawgu became a person of interest in numerous crimes committed not only in his community, but across the entire state as a whole. Now, this is how most often it ends. You would see some so-called men of God will spring up, come with all the flamboyance, miracles that blow your mind and all, sway the masses off their feet to follow them. And when they have the masses eating out of their palms, in quotes, their true nature seems to manifest eventually, where they are beginning to manifest certain evil tendencies that you wouldn't even expect of a man of God or a so-called man of God, if I should put it that way. That was exactly what seemed to be transpiring in the case of Eddy Nawgu. Now, this began to attract the attention of the Bakassi boys. Now, if you are not familiar with the Bakassi boys, let me just give you a brief history. They are a vigilante security group which was set up, and their sole purpose was to eradicate criminal activities from their state. You can go through my playlist. There's a story I did on how the Bakassi boys of Nigeria eliminated a very notorious armed robber by name Deriku Nwamama. You can go there in my playlist and you would see how ruthless these guys are. They seem to be above the law. Because sometimes it seems there are certain evil that only the vigilantes can get rid of, because sometimes the police almost seemingly seem to have their hands tied up. And so the atrocities allegedly committed by Eddy Nawgu drew the attention of these vigilante guys by name the Bakassi Boys. Now, it was also alleged that these Bakassi Boys could harness metaphysical powers, which in our normal African parlance we refer to as juju. So it seemed like not only were these guys ruthless and swift in their dispensation of justice, but they also had some spiritual fortification, which would make them very potent and effective in marching up against someone alleged to be a sorcerer like Eddy Nawgu. Because it was being rumored that Eddy Nawgu was engaged in certain blood and money rituals, blood and human sacrifices. So people were not happy with him at all. He had become a cancer in the state that was not willing to die, and the law didn't seem to have a way around him. So it seemed that this was a challenge for the Bakassi Boys to take up and solve. And they actually did, because Nawgu had been accused of kidnapping, aiding and abetting infamous criminals, partaking in rituals involving the use of human body parts, illegal possession of firearms, and human sacrifice. These are serious offenses. And for a so-called man of God, you wouldn't expect to find him meddling in such things. But these were the allegations that were being peddled against Eddy Nawgu, and the Bakassi Boys were not having any of it. So they set about trying to capture Eddy Nawgu. And guess what? With all their fortification, intelligence on the ground, and they were well resourced with weaponry, they still failed 13 times in their attempt to capture the sorcerer, Eddy Nawgu. And this was explained by the myth that Eddy Nawgu could defy the rules of conventional physics and had the ability to teleport from one place to the other. Now, this is interesting. You see, this is how myths grow in Africa, especially when it comes to so-called men of God. The society sort of inflates their mystery and add exaggerations to the point that even if the actual root cause of the Bakassi Boys failing 13 times to capture Eddy Nawgu was just due to the fact that they were misinformed, or maybe Eddy Nawgu was one step ahead of them, most members of the society, in order to spice up the mystery of the story of Eddy Nawgu, would rather twist the plot and make it that he had the power to teleport. I don't know why some people always want to garnish and exaggerate stories like these to this extent. But that was the allegation out there, that Eddy Nawgu could defy the rules of conventional physics and had the ability to teleport from one place to the other. Then he wouldn't need his car, actually. You know, these guys mostly are just men, human beings like us. They bleed, they sleep, they breathe in and out, just like everybody else. But they exalt themselves to a point where some people begin to think them as demigods in themselves. Now, eventually, it took the leader of the Bakassi Boys vigilante group named Ngweru to allegedly strip Eddy Nawgu of his ability to teleport from one place to the other. And this would lead to the capture of Eddy Nawgu. Now, once Eddy Nawgu was captured, the Bakassi Boys took him to their base of operation for further questioning and interrogation. And this would seem like a scene out of a jungle movie, but this is real life. Just as recent as the year 2000. So the rule of law was at work. Democracy was at work in Nigeria. But vigilantism was also at work. They had their own base of operation. They had their leaders. They had their structures. They had the means to question and interrogate him. And obviously, you wouldn't want to lie to these guys. And I'm sure you'll be wondering, where was the police and all these? But some way, somehow, it seems some members of the community actually embraced these guys. And I wouldn't be surprised they embraced them. Although per law, vigilantism wouldn't be appropriate. But in practice, when there is the impression that the police are corrupted, the citizenry begin to prefer other means of justice that are swift and to them deemed to be objective and swift without all the blockages and politics and all that seems to make criminals have an easy pass with the law. Now, they took him to their base of operations and the Bakassi Boys vigilante group set about with Eddy Nawgu. They released him eventually to the Nigerian police. Now, to the opposition of the Bakassi Boys, who argued that the police were corrupt and could easily be influenced, they still decided to release him to the Nigerian police. It is alleged that high-profile government workers and officials then allegedly interceded for the release of Eddy Nawgu, as reported by the head of the vigilante group. But unfortunately, the names of these political figures and government officials who were allegedly interceding for Eddy Nawgu's release were never published. So the Bakassi Boys took matters in their own hands and eventually they diced Eddy Nawgu up into pieces, after which all the parts were gathered together and put to fire at a market within the town. Now, don't let this surprise you, because it turns out that the people of the town that this happened at were very grateful to this Bakassi Boys vigilante group. And it's interesting, because one would expect that with such an action, the society wouldn't support it. But it turns out, even though someone would classify what the Bakassi Boys did as evil, the society preferred that as compared to the type of evil that Eddy Nawgu was perpetrating amongst them at the expense of members of their families and friends. So this ended the legacy of the so-called Sorcerer of Nigeria, Eddy Nawgu. And to date, his name sends shivers down the spines of some people when it's mentioned. There has actually been certain things done in his legacy, or just to continue on the legacy, such as movies done about him. One popularly titled Isakaba. You can look it up. Very popular Nigerian movie, and it speaks volumes of what this man actually did in his time on this earth in that state. What do you think about this? Do you think such men are actually as mysterious and spiritually powerful as they are exalted to be by the society, or sometimes it's just some people exaggerating until it becomes a myth? Subscribe if you are yet to do so. Turn on post notifications. I'll catch you on the next one. Stay safe out there.